Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we continue our debate on which Primarchs would pass the Emperor's test of the Great Crusade. There's no real need for a spoiler warning today, but just keep in mind I will be mentioning events from across the Warhammer 40k universe, and in particular the Horus Heresy. But with that said, let's waste no time and just jump straight in. Okay, now last week we were discussing the Alpharius Roboute Guilliman feud during the Great Crusade from the Primarch Omegon's perspective. And in the short story Council of Truth, he made a mention of how he believed the Great Crusade's true purpose was not actually to unify mankind, though of course that was a purpose, but that in fact the Emperor's real goal with it was to test his Primarchs, to see which of them would be able to be used in the next stage of his grand plan. And thus, I thought it would be fun to debate which of the Primarchs would have passed this possible test, if indeed the Horus Heresy never transpired. If, say, the corruption attempt on Horus at Davin failed, and the Great Crusade went on to be completed successfully. If you missed part 1, definitely go back and give that a listen first, as there we covered the Primarchs from the first, Lionel Johnson, up to the Angel Sanguinius, with us today continuing on from the 10th, the Gorgon Ferrus Manus. And as always with these discussions, there are no right or wrong answers, simply our own opinions. So agree, disagree, drop your own thoughts in the comments below. So far I've said he'd regretfully have to imprison Konrad Curze due to his mental stability by the end of the Crusade. I was extremely conflicted regarding Perturabo due to his massacre of his homeworld Olympia. And though I passed Fulgrim, his possession of a demon sword could quite easily change things if the Emperor or Malcador became aware. The rest of them, so far I think the Emperor would be very happy with. The only real debate being on how they would actually be involved in the next stage. Some like Rogol surely remaining within the Imperium to defend it. Others possibly being involved within the Webway campaign and conquest itself. However, anyway, let's crack on with our next Primarch, the Gorgon Ferrus Manus. Well, obviously if the Horus Heresy never arose, then Ferrus would still be alive and kicking, and as one of the earlier found Primarchs, he definitely seemed to be amongst the Emperor's most favoured and trusted sons. One of my favourite scenes of all being the Emperor asking him his opinion of Vulkan, the two of them together just standing back and observing Vulkan at war. It's one of the few moments you really feel the Emperor having a connection with one of his sons. And you definitely felt like he really felt the loss of Ferrus in the Heresy. And so, while Ferrus was a bit gruff and distant with a lot of his fellow Primarchs, I think the Emperor was perfectly happy with him. And I think there's a strong possibility Ferrus was the one Primarch told of the existence of chaos, given Medusa's proximity to the Eye of Terror, and Ferrus's ironclad loyalty. It's definitely between him and Lionel Johnson for my liking. So Ferrus for me would absolutely be a part of the Webway project. And interestingly, we have seen Vulkan pondering if the Emperor would have asked him and Ferrus to assist the Mechanicus with their efforts within the Webway too, which could be an intriguing possibility. However, moving on, next up we have Angron. Unless the Emperor was going complete and utter scorched earth policy within the Webway, I just can't see Angron being trusted at this stage. His implementation of the Butcher's Nails across the Legion had just pushed the World Eaters too far, and Russ's attempts at getting Angron to see sense had failed as well. We've seen that the Emperor did indeed look at trying to remove the nails from Angron's head, but that he came to the conclusion it simply wasn't possible without killing him. And so I don't see any realistic way that Angron could become trustworthy, that he could be relied upon to not go too far. And so it makes the possibility of Angron being seen as a success and being used for the next stage of the Emperor's plan as particularly unlikely in my mind. However, like I said, if the Emperor really just wanted to cleanse the webway without compassion, wanted a wrecking ball to send against Corax, for example, well then Angron and his Legion would be a pretty good choice. Just send them in and unleash them against the Drukhari. However, I just don't think the Emperor would actually use Angron like that. I think by this stage there'd simply be too much criticism of Angron by his fellow Primarchs. And so I really think only the Primarchs who would have been proven completely reliable would have had any chance of entering into the next stage of the Emperor's plan, as critical a stage as it was. And so no, I don't think Angron would pass the test, and I think he'd most likely be placed in some form of stasis in the hope the Emperor could find a way to remove the nails successfully somewhere down the line. His Legion, however, would undoubtedly be wiped out. And hey, who knows, maybe even Angron too. Okay, moving on, next up, we have Roboute Guilliman. This one is a pretty straightforward one for me. Roboute most definitely makes the cut to move on to the next stage of the grand plan, especially considering he conquered worlds like nobody else, leaving only stability in his wake. For all the brilliance of Horus, it was Guilliman who truly brought worlds into compliance, who forged the Imperium like no other. And I think his ability in this area, his structuring and administrative ability, would probably be a huge benefit for the Emperor in regards to establishing a working webway system across the Imperium, getting the Imperium to grips with having that far quicker and easier method of transportation, putting those systems and procedures in place. So the Ultramarines and Guilliman may not be heading the Crusade throughout the webway, but they would absolutely be playing a vital role in getting the Imperium ready for its success. Quite simply, there would be absolutely no one better for it than Guilliman. No question about it. Now, Mortarion. Mortarion is an interesting one. He of course had a tense relationship with the Emperor, and was extremely anti-use of psychic power, even psychers in general, which of course the Emperor was. His attitude was calmed somewhat by the implementation of the Nicaea decree, but there was still a lot of pent-up frustration within the Death Lord. However, Mortarion was one of the few Primarchs who had an idea of the Emperor's next upcoming stage, having found the webway portal being created within the palace in its earlier years, forcing Malcador to have to reveal portions of the Emperor's intentions. And so of all the Primarchs, Mortarion would be hugely invested in ridding humanity of its reliance on mutants such as navigators, and having to travel through the warp. Of course, the ultimate purpose of why that was all being done, to usher in humanity's psychic ascension, not so much. So it's undoubtedly a bit of a mixed bag in regards to Mortarion. Ultimately, at some point down the line, he's going to become a big issue. But in the meantime, he could be a big asset. So I'd wager Mortarion would be kept around, and would be a big factor in the war within the Webway. The Emperor using his Death Guard to their full devastating potential. Which honestly could perhaps be the true reason for Mortarion in the first place. This could be Mortarion's time to shine. Moving on, next up, Magnus the Red. Magnus here is a given. There's really no need to mess about. He would be sitting atop the Golden Throne, flying and exploring the Great Ocean alongside his father. Because let's remember, without the Heresy, without Magnus himself ripping a hole within the Webway, there would not be the never-ending assault of chaos. So Magnus would be able to man the Golden Throne far easier than the Emperor had to because of it, and so could do so easily given his power. Magnus is undoubtedly the most critical Primarch in the next stage. Moving on, Horus Lupercal. Another easy one here. Assuming the corruption attempt at Davin failed, the first found was Chosen Warmaster, and in truth by far the chosen son. He alone got to spend decades fighting by his father's side. He got to know the Emperor in a way no other Primarch did, and the Emperor him. And Horus achieved the best record during the Great Crusade. Yes, we can argue that's because he was there from the start, but the facts are the facts. And he was the War Master for a reason. He could unify his brothers who even the Emperor struggled with. So Horus, I think, would most definitely be a big part of the Emperor's Webway conquest, continuing to be a light and unifying presence amongst his brothers. Now, Lorgar. Just because the Crusade ended successfully doesn't mean Lorgar would have stayed loyal. As we know, the events of Monarchia transpired long before the end of the Crusade, and so Lorgar would still have been secretly turned to the ruinous powers. I don't see a way that pretense could have continued unnoticed forever. I think Lorgar's conversations with Magnus would have still continued, with Magnus continuing to get suspicious of some of the things Lorgar would be saying, and I think a loyal Magnus with Prospero never occurring would have definitely informed their father when it reached a point of concern. And for all that Nicaea hurt Magnus, his efforts to warn the Emperor of Horus's fall proves his loyalty. And even if we consider Lorgar does reach the end of the Crusade without his treachery being revealed, how long could that really have gone on for? I mean, could he really have deceived the Emperor and Malcador when they came into contact with the Primarch, with his legion? I'm not sure that could have gone on for long. The Emperor, perhaps, always concerned with other things as he was, but Malcador, the ever suspicious and watching Malcador, no way. He would definitely find out eventually. And if we assume there was some form of scrutiny of the Primarchs before the next grand stage was revealed to them, I'm not sure Lorgar's Legion could have passed that test. So I'm going to say no, Lorgar would be revealed to have fallen, and most likely be the only Primarch here who would be dealt with in the same manner as the two lost Primarchs. Lorgar and his legion would be wiped out and removed from memory. Moving on to the big man, Vulkan. Come on, there's no question here. Vulkan is absolutely passing any test the Emperor laid before him. He was undoubtedly one of the Emperor's favoured sons, and he was supremely loyal to his father. Like I said with Ferrus, there's a possibility he may have been involved with aiding the Mechanicum within the webway, creating those stable pathways. Who knows? I could equally see him remaining within the Imperium, guiding it through its new era of peace. But either way, he passes the test. Easy. And moving on, it's the same for the Raven Lord. Corax appears to have had the complete and full trust of the Emperor, and given the encounters we have seen, he had a good relationship with his father. So there's no doubts here. Corax passes the test. Now, I am not sure how effective his legion's tactics would be within the webway, but perhaps they'd be used more within the Imperium instead, putting down any attempted rebellions before they've even begun. But either way, the Raven Lord definitely stays on. And finally, Alpharius Omegon. If there's no heresy, then there's no listening to Xenos and fighting for a long victory against the ruinous powers. And so Alpharius would continue as he did. I guess the question of whether or not the Emperor knew of Omegon comes into question here. I personally think he created the twins, but even if he didn't, I think there's no way he couldn't know, given how powerful a psyker he was. But hey, I guess anything is possible in the lore. If somehow it came to light at the end of the Great Crusade that Omegon existed, and that the Emperor didn't know, that Alpharius had kept his existence a secret from everyone, well then I'm not sure that's a transgression that could be forgiven. It's a pretty huge betrayal of trust. And the Emperor would surely see Omegon's existence as an act of the ruinous powers, their power splitting or copying his Primarch in two. And so in that situation, I think we would see Alpharius and Omegon being removed from play, shall we say. However, again, I do think the Emperor knows, because I think he created them both. And I think Alpharius and Omegon are acting exactly as he made them. I don't see how Chaos could have the power to split a Primarch in two. And I think if they did, it would be a much bigger deal. So this one really depends on what you think of the origins of Omegon for me. The Alpha Legion performed as they were designed to in the Crusade. So there's absolutely no issue with the Emperor there. And I think they'd be the perfect legion to stay within the Imperium and put down those rebellions before they began, alongside the Raven Guard. But if Omegon was not the Emperor's doing, well then, there's no way the two of them aren't being wiped out. But that's it. That's the lot. The Primarchs who would pass the Great Crusade test, and the ones who wouldn't. For me, Konrad Curze, Angron, Lorgar are all Primarchs who would surely not be moving on to the next stage, and there's definite questions regarding Perturabo and Fulgrim, with Alpharius and Omegon depending entirely on their origin. And so as always everyone, what do you think? Do you agree with 3 Primarchs, possibly 6, 7 including Omegon, not making the cut? Who do you disagree with? Which Primarchs do you think would fail to move on to the next stage of the Emperor's plan, if indeed the Great Crusade was a test as Omegon believed? And out of those who pass, Who do you think would head into the webway, and who would remain to defend and build the Imperium? As always, drop your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers. Your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.